In the sweltering heat of Ouagadougou's dry season, President Ibrahim Traoré sat alone at his desk, eyes fixed on a single sheet of paper stamped with the unmistakable seal of the United States. It was an ultimatum. On it, in crisp diplomatic language, Washington demanded that Traoré reopen Burkina Faso's gold mines to American companies or face severe economic consequences. He laughed softly. So this was how they still played the game. Decades after independence, the same hands pulling the same strings. Outside his office window, he could hear the muffled chants of children rehearsing songs for Independence Day. The irony stung him deeper than any threat from across the Atlantic. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Lieutenant Diallo, his loyal security chief, stepped in, sweat shining on his forehead from the unforgiving sun. "Mr. President," Diallo said cautiously, glancing at the paper on the desk. "It's confirmed. They want you to fly to Dakar tomorrow. Trump's special envoy will meet you there to negotiate." Traoré's jaw tightened. Negotiate or deliver threats face to face? Diallo shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, the Americans don't believe you'll resist them. They say we can't afford to stand alone." Traoré rose from his chair, the muscles in his shoulders coiled like a lion waking up. "Tell our pilots to ready the Falcon. If they want a meeting, we'll give them one they'll never forget." He picked up the ultimatum, folded it neatly, and slipped it into his breast pocket, not as a surrender note, but as a trophy. Outside, as he strode past guards and aides, one thought fueled his calm anger. If Trump thinks Burkina Faso will bend, he hasn't met me properly yet. The next afternoon, the presidential Falcon jet touched down smoothly on the tarmac of Dakar's heavily guarded international airport. A convoy of black SUVs waited for Traoré and his security detail, their tinted windows hiding the American envoys inside. Lieutenant Diallo scanned the area, earpiece pressed tight, eyes flicking from rooftop to rooftop. "Sir, perimeter secure, but I don't trust this welcome party." Traoré adjusted his simple khaki jacket. No medals, no fanfare. He wanted the Americans to see exactly who they were trying to bully, a man who didn't need gold braid to prove he wouldn't be bought. Inside the VIP lounge, the air conditioning hummed quietly as Traoré entered, flanked by two unarmed bodyguards. At the far end, a plump, red-faced envoy in an expensive navy suit stood to greet him. Behind the envoy, an American flag was awkwardly draped next to a makeshift podium. "President Traoré!" the envoy boomed in a voice meant for cameras that weren't there. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. President Trump sends his regards and his instructions for a swift resolution." Traoré didn't bother with pleasantries. He sat down, motioning for Diallo to remain standing behind him. "You have 5 minutes. Speak clearly." The envoy's grin flickered. He shuffled his notes. "Mr. President, America is willing to ensure your government remains stable and prosperous if you reopen your gold mines to U.S. companies immediately. Otherwise, well, you know how fragile your situation is. A few closed doors in Washington, some frozen accounts, your economy will not break us," Traoré cut in, his voice low but slicing through the room like a blade. He leaned forward. "Tell Trump he has mistaken our silence for fear. Burkina Faso does not negotiate its dignity for dollars." The envoy's face darkened, sweat blooming on his forehead. "You should reconsider, Mr. President. We're talking about the future of your country." Traoré smiled, but there was nothing soft about it. "Indeed. And tonight, I'll remind you who decides that future. Meeting over." He stood, flicking an annoyed glance at the startled security staff. Diallo opened the door wide. Traoré walked out first, already planning his next move. Back in his Dakar hotel suite, Traoré paced the length of the room while Diallo reviewed encrypted messages on his tablet. The city lights glowed outside like restless fireflies, but inside, the tension was a living thing that filled every corner. Diallo cleared his throat. Mr. President, our sources say Trump's envoy is meeting with a few West African ministers tonight. They're offering big incentives, loans, arms, and security guarantees, if those ministers pressure you to accept the deal. Traoré paused at the window, watching his reflection stare back. They think they can buy the continent back with handshakes and secret cash. Same old tactics, new faces. He turned sharply. Diallo, arrange a discreet dinner for me tonight. Not here. Somewhere public but unannounced. I want to meet a few trusted regional allies, the ones who hate foreign meddling as much as I do. Diallo hesitated. Isn't that risky, sir? The Americans might have eyes everywhere in Dakar tonight. Traoré's smile was the smile of a man who had survived betrayal, ambushes, and half a dozen coups. Good, let them watch. Let them hear every word I say tonight, and let them tremble knowing they cannot silence me. Within an hour, he slipped out through the hotel's service entrance, dressed in a simple local tunic. No security convoy, no flashing lights. As far as he was concerned, power did not hide behind walls. Power walked openly among its people and never flinched in the face of threats, even when they came with a White House seal. The rendezvous point was a modest Senegalese restaurant near the fishing docks, noisy, busy, and impossible to monitor completely. Traoré arrived without an entourage, slipping in through the back, guided by a trusted local fixer. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of grilled fish and the chatter of families unwinding after sunset. At a corner table shielded by hanging plants, 3 figures waited. They were not heads of state, but powerful behind-the-scenes brokers, old allies from Mali, Guinea, and Niger. Men who had survived decades of shifting alliances and who now looked to Traoré as the spearhead of a new Africa, less polite and more stubborn. One of them, a wiry ex-general named Ba, leaned in as soon as Traoré sat. Ibrahim, the Americans offered me a house in Paris and a pension for my silence, he said, his eyes glinting with dry amusement. They forget I already have a house, my people's trust. Traoré chuckled, breaking off a piece of warm bread. Then tonight, my friends, we agree, no more closed-door deals. Tomorrow, I fly back to Ouagadougou and announce to the world what they threatened me with. If they want war in the media, we'll give them one. The other men exchanged quick nods. Over plates of spicy fish, they laid out a bold plan. Coordinated press statements, surprise national addresses, and secret back channels to African journalists who would expose America's desperate scramble for resources. As laughter and low murmurs rose around the table, none noticed the short man in a baseball cap lingering by the door, pretending to check his phone. Far from being a curious local, he was the CIA's eyes for this part of town, and he'd just heard enough to set off alarms back in Washington. Traoré caught him in the reflection of a brass teapot. His grin widened. Let them listen, he thought. Tomorrow, the world will listen to me instead. By dawn, the city of Dakar hummed with rumors. Drivers at taxi ranks whispered about seeing Traoré eating in a cheap local joint. A rumor that the Americans had tried to corner him spread like wildfire through WhatsApp groups, fueling neighborhood debates from fishing docks to student cafes. Meanwhile, inside the U.S. envoy's temporary residence, a luxury villa on the Atlantic coast, panic had begun to bloom. The envoy, still rumpled from an anxious night, barked into a secure phone line. You need to stop him, Mr. President. He's planning a public statement, and it will make us look like colonial fools. We can't afford that press nightmare with an election year looming. Thousands of miles away in Washington, Trump listened with growing irritation. He hated surprises, especially from young African leaders who didn't know their place. Then fix it, he growled. I don't care how you do it. Buy him off, threaten his cabinet, cut his aid, hell, leak something on him if you have to. Just make sure he shuts up before this blows up in the press. But as the envoy scrambled, Traoré was already 2 steps ahead. Back in his suite, he recorded a short video statement. No teleprompter, no flags. Just him in a plain white shirt, speaking straight to the people of Africa. Brothers and sisters, he began, voice calm but burning with certainty. Some powers believe they can buy our silence, threaten our future, and decide which of us should lead. But Burkina Faso does not negotiate its soul. Diallo watched behind the camera, barely suppressing a grin. Once finished, he hit send. Within minutes, the clip spread like wildfire, first on local radio sites, then Pan-African news portals, then international feeds. By the time the American envoy realized what was happening, it was too late. The voice of a young African president was trending above Trump's name on social media, and the world was about to hear every detail. By mid-morning, the streets of Ouagadougou erupted with a restless energy. Students skipped classes to gather around mobile phone screens replaying Traoré's statement. Market women debated loudly over baskets of mangoes, declaring that never again would outsiders dictate their country's wealth. In Washington, the damage control machine spun into overdrive. A carefully worded press release claimed President Trump highly respected Burkina Faso's sovereignty, but few bought it. Journalists smelled blood in the water. Questions poured in at the White House press briefing. Had the U.S. threatened to destabilize a Democratic ally? Meanwhile, back in Dakar, the American envoy and his security attaché plotted their last desperate move. They knew Traoré planned to board his Falcon jet that afternoon and return to Burkina Faso. If they couldn't silence him by diplomacy, they'd try intimidation. In a quiet VIP corridor of the airport, the envoy cornered Diallo. "Lieutenant, be smart," he hissed, voice low and snake-like. "Convince your president to retract that statement. We'll double whatever he wants. Gold, arms, investments, name it. Or else accidents happen. Planes crash." Diallo didn't flinch. He leaned so close the envoy could smell his sweat from the African sun. "Mr. Envoy, the only accident today will be you slipping and breaking your career. You think we fear threats? You forget who trained us to survive worse." A soft click broke the tension. Diallo's concealed mic had captured every word. Smiling coldly, he pressed send. Within seconds, local news outlets had the audio. The final nail in Washington's coffin. Minutes later, Traoré stepped onto the tarmac, lifting a hand to a small crowd of dock workers who had gathered to cheer him off. He turned back to Diallo with an amused shake of his head. "They threaten planes now? Next, they'll threaten the sun itself. Let's go home, brother." As the Falcon lifted off, engines roaring above a city buzzing with whispers of rebellion, Traoré knew this fight was far from over. But he also knew he had already humiliated an empire with nothing more than truth and courage. High above the Atlantic, the presidential Falcon cut through calm blue skies. Inside, Traoré leaned back in his seat, eyes closed but mind racing. He replayed every word of the envoy's threats in his head, not out of fear, but as fuel for what came next. Diallo sat across from him, laptop open, scanning news feeds. "Mr. President," he said, voice low but unable to hide a note of pride, "the leak worked. French and British outlets picked up the story. They're calling it the New African Defiance. Even CNN has requested an interview." Traoré cracked a tired smile. "Let them wait. First we speak to our people, then the continent. The West can listen last." Below them, the plane crossed invisible lines that once divided empires. On the ground, farmers and students alike now saw themselves in a leader who didn't flinch at threats from the White House. Back in Washington, chaos brewed behind closed doors. Trump's advisors argued about damage control while the president himself fumed at the lack of leverage. "He made me look weak," he raged at his inner circle. "I want options on my desk, military, economic, whatever hurts him most." But hurting Traoré would not be simple. In Ouagadougou, plans were already in motion. The moment he landed, Traoré would address the nation live. Then he'd meet with key regional leaders for an emergency summit. Not to beg for help, but to unite against external blackmail. Diallo glanced out the window as land appeared beneath the clouds. Dusty roads, small farms, and the heartbeat of a country ready to stand firm. "Sir," he said quietly as the falcon dipped lower. Are you sure you're ready for their next move? Traoré opened his eyes, his voice calm as ever. They threatened my life and my people's future. Now it's our turn to remind them. Africa does not bow, not to gold, not to guns, not to Trump. As the wheels touched down and cheers rose from the runway, it was clear this was more than a personal victory. This was a message, and the world was listening. The landing was triumphant. Even before the Falcon's engines cooled, hundreds had gathered outside Ouagadougou's military airstrip. Farmers, students, soldiers, mothers with children on their backs. They waved flags, chanted his name, and held handwritten signs, "No more puppets," and "Africa first, forever." Traoré stepped down the aircraft stairs without ceremony, greeting them not as a distant president, but as a son of the same dusty streets. He clasped rough hands, smiled at barefoot children, and nodded at old market women whose wrinkles told stories older than any empire. Inside the modest presidential press hall, a sea of microphones and journalists waited. Diallo handed him a crisp shirt. He refused a suit. He wanted the world to see a leader who looked like the people he served, not a man polished for foreign approval. He stepped up to the podium. The room instantly hushed. His eyes, fierce yet warm, scanned the cameras that would beam his words from Ouagadougou to Washington, Beijing, and every African capital in between. Yesterday, he began, voice steady but echoing with restrained fire, we were told by a foreign power that our gold, our resources, our future belonged to them, or else we would pay. He paused, letting the words settle like a warning drumbeat. Well, we have paid for centuries, paid in sweat, in blood, in freedom stolen by men who thought Africa would never rise. The reporters scribbled furiously, eyes wide. Today, I say enough. We will trade, we will partner, but we will not kneel. Not to Washington, not to any empire. A young journalist raised her hand, trembling. Mr. President, do you fear retaliation? Traoré's reply came like thunder wrapped in calm. Fear? Number. If standing for our dignity brings hardship, so be it. Hardship builds nations. Fear builds cages. Outside, the crowd roared as the first snippets hit the internet. Africa does not kneel. Traoré stepped back from the microphones. Diallo met his eyes, pride swelling. Together they knew this was bigger than gold, bigger than Trump. This was the day a small nation told the world, we choose freedom, come what may.
The ripple effect was immediate. Within hours, clips from Traoré's speech flooded Africa's social feeds. In Nairobi, students shared it under the hashtag #NoKneeling. In Lagos, young activists reposted quotes alongside calls to audit oil contracts. In Johannesburg, radio hosts debated live whether South Africa should break old trade deals written on foreign terms. But not everyone was cheering. In a secure room inside the Pentagon, a handful of Trump's senior advisors debated retaliation options, cutting aid, slapping sudden sanctions, quietly backing local rivals. They knew an overt coup attempt was too risky. But subtle sabotage had been their favorite tool for decades. Meanwhile, Traoré sat in a small garden behind the presidential residence, taking a rare moment to breathe. Fireflies winked in the dusk. Diallo, ever watchful, sat across from him with a tablet balanced on his knee. Mr. President, they're moving fast. 2 banks froze funds connected to our mining consortiums this evening, and there's chatter about inciting protests in the capital to paint you as incompetent. Traoré plucked a leaf, rolling it between his fingers thoughtfully. Let them. Their fear is proof we are right where we need to be. Diallo frowned. Do you want me to tighten security around your family? Traoré's eyes hardened. Yes, but more importantly, prepare the radio address for dawn. If they block our money, we'll show the people how to stand on our own feet. If they stir protests, I'll walk into the crowd myself. Diallo cracked a grin despite himself. You never did like hiding behind walls. Traoré's gaze lifted to the dark sky, alive with distant stars. A lion does not hide, Diallo, and neither should Africa. Far away, in a White House lit late into the night, Trump slammed a fist on his desk as fresh headlines came in. African leader defies Trump. Sparks continent-wide movement. The empire trembled, not because of tanks or missiles, but because a small nation had remembered what freedom tasted like. The next dawn broke over Ouagadougou with an air of defiance sharper than the morning chill. Before the sun was high, Traoré's voice carried through old radios in market stalls, across crackling loudspeakers in dusty bus stations, and streamed on phones in internet cafes from Dakar to Dar es Salaam. "My people," he said, speaking not from a palace but from the steps of the National University, surrounded by students and mothers with babies tied to their backs. "Today, some powers freeze our money. Tomorrow, they may block our roads, our trade, our dreams. Let them try, they will fail." He raised a worn hand. "Because what they cannot freeze is our spirit. What they cannot block is our courage. What they cannot buy is our freedom." A wave of cheers rose from the students, echoing down the streets where small shopkeepers turned up their radios and passing taxis honked in approval. For a fleeting moment, the city felt like a single beating heart. At that very hour, inside an opulent office in Washington, Trump seethed behind his desk, advisors flinching at his outbursts. Every strategy, every threat, every back-channel deal, outplayed by a barefoot son of Africa speaking truth in plain words. Back home, Traoré knew the struggle had only begun. He and Diallo spent that night drafting bold new trade proposals with trusted neighbors, forging local supply chains, and planning a Pan-African economic summit free from Western strings. Long after the last candle flickered out in the palace hallway, Traoré stood alone at his window, watching the quiet city lights below. He whispered to the darkness, "They wanted to make an example of me. But tonight, we made an example of them." Outside his window, the streets of Ouagadougou hummed with a new certainty that no threat, no president, no superpower could ever again dictate the heartbeat of Africa. My beloved people of Burkina Faso, and my proud brothers and sisters across Africa. Today, you saw the mask fall. They tried to buy our silence, to freeze our lifelines, to break our resolve. They failed. They thought we would bow to threats. We stood taller. They thought we would trade our future for their approval. We chose our own path instead. Let this moment be remembered not as the day an empire tried to bend us, but as the day we reminded the world. Africa kneels to no one. Our struggle does not end here. There will be more storms, more sabotage, more whispers in dark rooms. But together, we will outlast them all. Because our courage is older than their power, and our dignity is worth more than their gold. To every mother, every farmer, every student who believes freedom is not a gift but a right, this fight is yours as much as it is mine. Stay strong, stay proud, stay free. For our ancestors, for our children, and for the Africa we dream of every day. Thank you, and may our unity be our shield forever. Onwards,